This is the text of the letter the prophet Jeremiah sent from Jerusalem to the surviving elders among the exiles and to the priests, the prophets, and all the other people Nebuchadnezzar had carried into exile from Jerusalem to Babylon. This was after King Jehoiakim and the queen mother, the court officials and the leaders of Judah and Jerusalem, the craftsmen and the artisans had gone into exile from Jerusalem. He entrusted the letter to Elisah, son of Shaphan, and to Gemariah, son of Hildah, whom Zedekiah, king of Judah, sent to King Nebuchadnezzar in Babylon. It said, "This is what the Lord Almighty, the God of Israel, says to all those I carried into exile from Jerusalem to Babylon. Build houses and settle down. Plant gardens and eat what they produce. Marry and have sons and daughters. Find wives for your sons and give your daughters in marriage, so that they too may have sons and daughters. Increase in number there, do not decrease. Also, seek the peace and prosperity of the city to which I have carried you into exile. Pray to the Lord for it, because if it prospers, you too will prosper. Yes, this is what the Lord Almighty, the God of Israel, says. Do not let the prophets and diviners among you deceive you. Do not listen to the dreams you encourage them to have. They are prophesying lies to you in my name. I have not sent them, declares the Lord. This is what the Lord says. When 70 years are completed for Babylon, I will come to you and fulfill my gracious promise to bring you back to this place. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you and not to harm you. Plans to give you hope and a future. Then you will call upon me and come and pray to me, and I will listen to you. You will seek me and find me when you seek me with all your heart. I will be found by you, declares the Lord, and will bring you back from captivity. I will gather you from all the nations and places where I have banished you, declares the Lord. And I will bring you back to the place from which I carried you into exile. The word of the Lord.
Thanks, Alex, for reading that letter to the exiles. Have you ever found yourself somewhere where you, like, all of a sudden you kind of look around and you're like, oh, I'm not where I thought I was? That maybe it's just me, but every now and then that's happened to me. I'm in an experience where I'm like, oh, wait a minute. As they say, you're not in Kansas anymore. Whoever they are, but they say that sometimes. So this most recently happened to me as I was thinking about it when I was on vacation this summer. And I am aware that there is a world kind of for the super elite, but I don't touch that world that often. I just don't. But anyway, Jackson, we're on vacation. Jackson really wanted to go see supercars in Vancouver. And so if you're familiar with Vancouver, Burrard Street, there's a whole bunch of like dealerships like clustered together that sell supercars. Ferrari, Lamborghini, McLaren, I don't know what else, those cars. So he talks me into, let's go, Dad, to the showrooms. I'm like, okay, let's do that. So we're clearly not buyers, okay? It's my 11-year-old son and me and a whatever. But I'm super nervous because I'm just like so afraid that he's gonna like touch this car and the fingerprint will scratch the paint and I'll be into it for $30,000 or whatever. These cars, like the cheapest car we looked at was $430,000. It was like the cheapest car, and I'm like, this is like I'm not in Kansas right now. And I just thought I'll make polite conversation with the sales guy at the Ferrari dealership, thinking that, his job is probably, really boring because he probably sells like one car a year. I said to him, hey man, how many cars do you sell? Like, any? And he says, oh, I sold 3 this month, he said. And I'm looking at my watch, I'm going like, it's the 9th of August. You've sold 3 of these? I'm like, wow. And I'm like, you're just not where you think you are all of a sudden. You're just like, oh, there's a world out there that is not like mine. Because I cannot buy a car that costs more than my house. these places exist, and I'm not trying to be critical. It's not the point of the story. I'm just saying sometimes you're completely out of your depth. You're in a foreign place. This is the experience of the exiles in Jeremiah. They're not where they think they are. They're not in Jerusalem anymore. In the narrative that's sort of behind Jeremiah's warnings is, look, if you don't turn back to God, turn back to the covenant, God in his, really in his sadness and his anger, his hurt, will bring judgment in the form of Babylon coming to essentially destroy Jerusalem and deport you. A whole bunch of you are going to be brought over to the city of Babylon and live there, which is exactly what happened in 586. Is that correct? 586 BC. Babylon came in and conquered Judah, the southern part of Israel, destroyed Jerusalem, the temple, and carried a whole bunch of ancient Jews, the Israelites, into exile. They weren't where they thought they were anymore. They're like, nah. And to those people, Jeremiah pens a letter. And I mean, we've talked about this before. I realize that we don't write letters quite the same way that we used to, but when I was in boarding school in 1977, my mom, who's sitting right there, wrote me letters every week. And I'd get this letter, like this little airmail thing. I can still picture it with the little border around the envelope. And I just like, letter. I looked forward to these weekly letters. And I can imagine these exiles in a foreign country wondering if anybody remembers them at all. All of a sudden, Jeremiah sends them a letter. They get a letter from Jeremiah, and they're like so curious about what it's going to say. And that's what we want to look at this morning. What is this letter? What are the things that Jeremiah is saying to the exiles, the Jewish people who are now living in a foreign space? Now, I realize you haven't likely, I don't think, been invaded by Babylonians. That's probably not your reality, but I think sometimes we feel like we're in a foreign space in our world. Like you kind of look around and you're like, I barely recognize this place anymore. Maybe there's ideologies that are swirling around you. Perhaps there are different visions of the good life that your friends are sort of living out. And some of them are like really incongruous to the Christian story. And you're like, wow, you think that? I'm like, wow, that's really curious. So some of it can be benign-ish, like memes. Who understands memes? Like, really? I know you think you understand memes. You don't. Nobody understands memes. Like, you're just like, what is that? Like, what? Like, it's a strange... Or K-pop. We'll talk, Wally. I mean, what is that? I'm just like, that is so strange. But sometimes it's less benign, right? Where things get... I remember reading this some years ago now, but it's still tragic. Autobiography of Dallaire, Romeo Dallaire, and he's writing about his experience in Rwanda and the Rwandan genocide. And he retells this story of these warnings that he was trying to give to people, like the power brokers who perhaps could let's deal with this before it goes crazy and bad. And one of the responses he got, this is hard to say out loud, one of the responses he got was, oh, hey, Rwanda, what do they have? All they have is people. What? As in, like, they don't have oil or they don't have some other resource that we care about. All they have is people. And you're just like, what planet am I on right now? Right? Like, so sometimes, like, we live in this space. We're exiles. The values that I like, man, I would, like, die on that hill. People aren't even thinking about. And so, like I say, even though you haven't been invaded by Babylon, I think we can sometimes as Christians feel like exiles. In fact, Peter, when he writes his letter to the Christians scattered across what is now Turkey and Greece and that region, he refers to them as exiles. You're going to live in the world kind of out of step with the world you find yourself in. Eugene Peterson, in his commentary or his introduction to the book of Jeremiah, It's not a commentary, he's just giving a one-page introduction to Jeremiah. He writes this: what happens when everything you believe in and live by is smashed to bits? Right? And as we feel our culture shifting and some of the values you value are just shifting under your feet, what happens? Does catastrophe work to reform our lives? To conform us to God, to who God actually is, as opposed to the way we imagined him to be? Or do these circumstances lead to an abandonment of God? Does it trigger a stubborn grasping of the old collapsed systems, holding on for dear life to an illusion? I feel like these are contemporary questions. This is a contemporary letter. How do we live in a culture that's so shifting rapidly and at times in ways that I just think almost unrecognizable? And so I just invite you to hear the letter again that Jeremiah writes to the exiles. He is writing to exiles in 580 BC. But I think he's also, God in his wisdom is also writing to us. Just 3 simple things that I'll lift out of the letter. There's lots of other things we could say. The first thing I would say is live. The first advice that he gives is live. Look at the verbs in the letter. Build houses, settle down, plant gardens, eat, marry, have sons and daughters, increase. I mean, I don't know, like if you put all those together, what other verb would you come up with to live there? Like buy yourself a house, settle down, get married, have a family, eat. That's just the stuff of life. He's inviting the exiles, hey, I get that you're in Babylon right now, but that's where you are. So the first thing I'd say about life among the Babylonians is it's intended to be life among the Babylonians. That's your address right now, is what Jeremiah is saying. And rather than longing for what once was, oh, I wish I was in Jerusalem. I wish it was Jerusalem all over again. Kind of some nostalgia. I wish it was the 50s. I don't know. I wasn't alive in the 50s. I don't know if it was that good. But you do hear people sort of longing for something other than the reality they're in. Or the other thing we tend to do, and I do this too, is we kind of escape the reality we're in. Like, oh man, this Netflix show is like 35 seasons. Perfect. And we don't have to face the reality that we're in. But I think the first thing, the most obvious thing that Jeremiah is inviting the exiles to pay attention to is just live where you are. This is where you are. Live there. Frodo came to mind. Big surprise. There's this little, right at the beginning of the story, it doesn't show up at the beginning of the movie, though they do include this in the movie. But there's this little moment that Frodo is realizing that the ring he has in his hand is the ring of power. And he's wishing that ring had never come to him. That's how the line is said in the movie. I wish the ring had never come to me. In the book it reads, I wish it need not have happened in my time. I didn't want this. Gandalf's response, so do I, said Gandalf. And so do all who live to see such times. But that is not for them to decide. All we have to decide is what to do with the time we have been given. All we have to decide is what to do with the time which we have been given. It can be easy to imagine a different reality than the one we're in. A simpler time, a less fractious time, a less divisive time, a less expensive time, a less whatever. And I wish for some of those things too. But this is the time I'm in. This is the reality I'm living in. And I think the first thing I want to hear and be reminded of that Jeremiah is reminding the exiles of his day and reminding the exiles in our day, live where you are. This is where you are. The second thing he goes on to say is seek the peace of the city. So after he's given all these verbs, he says, increase in number, do not decrease. Also, he says, seek the peace and the prosperity of the city. Now, a couple things I want to say here. The word peace gets a little flattened in the English language. So we think of peace as absence of conflict or kind of general, like we feel like okay. And it does include that, like that's accurate. But in the Hebrew, the word for peace, shalom, is a much, much, much richer concept. It includes things like health, welfare, prosperity, right relationships. Not only right relationships with each other, but right relationships with God and right relationship with creation. All of that gets kind of drawn into this word shalom. It talks about the common good, wholeness, this whole idea of well-being. So when Jeremiah says, seek the peace of the city, he's talking about seek the wellness and the holistic wellness of the city. And the city, make no mistake here, the city he's talking about is Babylon. Babylon, who's just invaded and destroyed what they held dear. And you just probably want to pause for a moment. You're like, whoa, what? He is inviting the exiles to not only live where they are, but now seek the peace and the prosperity of the city in which they're in. To work hard, to do things that are good and lead to good on behalf of Babylon. If you shift over from Jeremiah to Daniel, the book of Daniel, you can see some stories of how the exiles tried to live that out. Daniel and his three buddies, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they're trying to figure out how to do that. They are government employees working for the government of Babylon, for the city administration, like they're down at City Hall, trying to make sense of how do we do our work. And they do their work so well on behalf of Babylon, they get promoted. Fascinating stories to look at. And it, I think, echoes out to us to ask questions, how do we work for the good of our city, for the good of Calgary? We all touch our city in different ways. We're all involved in different things. Some of you are in education. And that's been a system that's been, I think, stretched and has gone through some difficult seasons quite recently. And so it's not an easy place to be, I would imagine. How do you work for the good of the education system, the good of the students in your class, the good of kind of the larger enterprise? About half the church here is in healthcare. So you live in that space. And that too is a system that is stretched, I think. And there's all kinds of conversation at higher levels that I can't always make sense of. Not my lane. I don't quite understand all of the policies and the politics and all of that. But as you live in that system, wherever you find yourself in that system, however high up the chain you are or wherever you touch that system, how do you work for the good of the city, the good of your patients, the good of the whole enterprise? What is it to work for the peace of the shalom of AHS, the shalom of CBE, the shalom of Calgary? That's what Jeremiah is inviting you to think about. It's not an abstract city. It's the one you're in, remember? The one you live in. How do we work for its good? For some of us, it might be the school you go to. I mean, you're in that part of the education world. So you're a student. I'm looking at some of you folks up on the balcony and other places. How do you work for the good of your friendships? How do you work for the good of your literal neighbors on the street? I think these are just questions that sort of emerge from this letter that I think are just ripe with possibility. Just He's just like, I don't know, actually. But it's just that's just a question I'm just going to kind of dangle out there for you and just invite you to talk about over lunch. How do we work for the shalom, God's shalom, in the place we find ourselves? Work, play, friendship groups, neighborhood, on and on it could go. It's a great question, and it's a great invitation. So that's the second thing. First thing is just live where you are. This is where you are. Second is to seek the peace or the shalom of that city. The third thing that I'll draw out of this is to pray. So also seek the peace and prosperity of the city to which I have carried you into. Pray to the Lord for it. So this is an extension of seeking shalom, is praying for the city. And again, keep in mind, he's inviting the exiles to pray for Babylon, a city that is just destroyed, the things they hold dear. Right? This picks up what Jesus will say in the Sermon on the Mount, right? When he says, you've heard it said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemy and pray for those who persecute you. Like, this is exactly what Jeremiah is saying in an earlier iteration. Pray for the city and notice what he says here. Because if the city prospers, if Babylon prospers, you also will prosper. It'll just be better for you if you live in a city that's flourishing. Paul, when he's writing to his friend Timothy, in his letters, 1st and 2nd Timothy, first letter, second letter, there may have been others, but those are the two we have. In one of those two letters, I think it's in the first letter, he invites Timothy to pray for the emperor, pray for the king, pray for those in charge, right? And Roman emperors weren't, there were a lot of things, probably nice guys wasn't one of them. And so here, like Paul's just saying, look, just pray for those who hold these leadership positions, which is a challenging text for me. I reread it again. I tend to criticize those in leadership positions, not pray for them. And so the invitation here from Jeremiah then, back to that letter, is pray for the city you're in. Pray for the leaders of that city. Pray for the people who actually pull strings and make decisions. Pray that they make wise decisions. Pray that the city prospers. I think of a story that Cliff told me years ago probably, during COVID, when he just went for walks through his neighborhood. And he just prayed for the things that he encountered in his neighborhood. As simple as that. Just go for a walk and just pray for the people in those homes. Or you pass a school, pray for that school. You pass a business, pray for that business. You just pray for what's there. This is a super encouraging letter. It would not have been, I think, what the exiles would have expected. But this comes down to us now as God's word, God's address to the exiles, God's address to us. To live, to seek, and to pray. But let me locate this. What Caleb invited us, or maybe he was here praying, is what I'm thinking of. He invited me at least to remember. All of this takes place in a larger story. And here we get to probably the most well-known verse in Jeremiah, verse 11. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you, not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future. The reason I think Jeremiah is writing these things, or at least the larger context out of which Jeremiah writes these things, inviting these people to live in Babylon, to seek the peace, the shalom of Babylon, to pray for Babylon, is because we live in a larger story. We live in a hope-filled story. He's not trying to generate hope out of these exiles. What he's trying to say to them is there's already hope. You live in a story that's infused with hope because God's in that story. And therefore, out of that place of hope, you can live. Therefore, out of that place of hope, you can seek shalom. Therefore, out of that place of hope, you can pray. I remember listening to a podcast, a Timothy Keller podcast some years ago when he was still alive. And he was interviewing, I think, or maybe, the podcast guy was interviewing this Dutch pastor. I'm like, I'm listening, right? Dutch, I'm Dutch. So he's going to have something good to say. And he did, actually. He was very good. Stefan Paas is the guy's name, if you want to know. And then chatting away, he says some really interesting things. He's living in Holland. He's doing his ministry in Holland and Amsterdam. Amsterdam is a challenging city, shall we say. And at one point, the interviewer says, well, are you optimistic that things will get better? And I loved his response without skipping a beat. He goes, oh, no, I'm not optimistic at all. He says, but I am hopeful because Christ has risen. What a great sentence. Optimism is you sort of hope that it'll get better. Like, I hope it won't snow all winter. Or whatever it is you hope. It's kind of this like wish into the air. What Stefan Paas said is, no, actually have hope that lands somewhere, that's rooted somewhere in the story of Jesus, who Jesus is and what Jesus is about. This is what Jeremiah is saying. Everything I'm telling you in this letter that I'm inviting you to do is grounded in hope. Because God is in the story and God will restore you. God knows the plans he's got. God's moving the story forward. This is a hope-filled story. So, as you find yourself in your own version of Babylon, Calgary, and you might find there's things, there's currents happening around you that you think, this is not a story that I link into, a story I understand. This is confusing to me. I don't agree with. I find myself in all iterations of that reality, just like you do. I live in the same city. We are invited to live here, to actually fully be here, to let our roots grow down here, to build, and if you can afford, a house, to settle, to have a family, to interact with friends, to get to know your neighbors, to build relationships. This is your address. I invite you to live here. I invite you to seek the shalom of this city. And I think that is a big question that I really, truly invite you to explore with friends in this community. To say, what does it look like to work for the shalom of the place I live or work or go to school or have relationships? I think that's a really, really live question. And then to pray.